Thank you very much. Would Casella or KTI or both or separate, however we've both been talked about?
Don Meagher from Casella Waste Systems, and with me Emerson, also from Casella Waste Systems. I'll talk more about Juniper Ridge. Dan's expertise is KTI Biofuels. He's the manager of that facility. First thing I'd like to just spend a few minutes on, and I've talked about this before, but I'd like to correct the assertion that has been made a number of times that somehow the state has derived no financial benefit from the Juniper Ridge landfill. First, in 2004, Casella paid the state of Maine $26 million for the privilege to operate that landfill for 30 years. There are a number of direct benefits that go both to Old Town Fuel and Fiber in Old Town and Lincoln Pulp and Paper in Lincoln, and those are below market disposal fees for residues from those mills, tipping fees at the Juniper Ridge landfill at well below what those mills could operate their own landfills for, and so there is a direct financial benefit to those two mills, which was a goal the state had back in 2003. There is also currently a $2 million a year subsidy to Old Town Fuel and Fiber related to the CDD fuel obligation that was entered into as part of that arrangement back in 2003. Finally, the form that I've handed out to you, it's one that I've handed out many times, but let me go over it again. The total aggregate direct financial payments that Juniper Ridge has made either to the city of Old Town, the town of Alton, the neighbors around the landfill, or the state of Maine exceeds $15 million over the past 8 years. City of Old Town has received directly approaching $8 million over that period of time. Town of Alton approaching $500,000. The neighbors themselves nearly $3 million, and the state of Maine special waste fee over $4 million. So the impression that somehow the state has gotten no benefit out of that facility on a financial standpoint is simply factually incorrect. I'm trying to think the topic of Juniper Ridge charging lower fees to our company haulers than we do to other haulers coming into the facility. Representative DeShane correctly noted that that is prohibited in our contract with the state. And understand, regardless of whether we are a vertically integrated company or not, a hauling operation is a cost center, and it has expenses that it has to offset against its revenues. And our hauling companies have to do that, as do other hauling companies going into the facility. So the fact that there is vertical integration and somehow or other the landfill can lose money in order for the hauling operation to not lose money, I think is just a simple misunderstanding of how business works. In terms of KTI, I'm not sure, Dan, if there were any specific things that we wanted to comment on.
I would only add that with Juniper Ridge, and Waste Management brought it up, we have 100,000 ton per year C&D membership commitment to Red Shield. If we can't supply them with 100,000 tons, or they can't utilize that 100,000 tons, we actually pay them over $1 million, almost $1.5 million a year. When we first entered into that agreement, we were setting up KTI in our customer base in order to supply that facility with those chips. Hence why we're bringing in the volume of wood chips, CDD into KTI in order to prepare ourselves to do that. And we're still to this day contractually obligated to do that. However, since we're not shipping that material to Red Shield for Old Town Fuel and Fiber, that material now is going to Moralex and Sappi, divided between the two. And Old Town at this point can't burn that. So again, we're just issuing a check every year to Old Town Fuel and Fiber.
I think finally I have to take exception to the assertion that somehow or another Casella has not managed the Juniper Ridge landfill in a manner that it was expected to do back in 2003. I could go into the entire history, as I attempted to do before. I realize that gets somewhat tedious. But if one follows the resolve that this committee passed, to the request for proposals that the State Planning Office put out to select an operator for that facility, to Casella's proposal in response to that RFP, to the state selecting us as the operator, and please note that we were the only company that bid on that RFP, which might give you some idea of how difficult it was and has been to meet the requirements in that RFP. Nobody else thought they could make money at it. We took the risk. Going from the RFP to our proposal to our contract with the state, I would ask somebody to give us a specific instance in which that is not being followed as it was expected to occur. Take the example of C&D processing into wood fuel, and that out-of-state waste would be a large component of that. That was fully understood in 2003. It was incorporated into our proposal to the state. It was incorporated into our contract with the state to operate that landfill. And to now, 8 years later, somehow say C&D being used to fulfill that obligation is a surprise is simply a mischaracterization of what the understanding was in 2003. The very definition of out-of-state waste, that waste coming into Maine and being processed is then acceptable waste at Juniper Ridge. That topic was specifically addressed at the work session when that bill was being debated, and two representatives of this committee asked representatives of state government if waste is brought into Maine and processed in Maine, is that residue then Maine waste, and is it acceptable to go to Juniper Ridge? And the answer from three representatives, from the governor's office, from the DEP, and from the state planning office was yes. And that is what is going on today. It is entirely consistent with 2003. It is consistent with state statute. And again, we seem to be wanting to revisit a decision that the state made at that time. If that was unacceptable in 2003, then the decision should have been made then not to move forward. But revisiting it today, I think, was simply changing a decision that was made then. And the state entered into a contract on the basis of that understanding.
I just wanted to correct. I think everyone around this horseshoe knows and agrees and appreciates the fact that Casella has given quite a bit of remuneration to the state and to different entities and municipalities as you laid out here. I think for some of us, and I'm not speaking for the committee, the concern is that the value upon the entire contract is not something, in some of our opinions, that it should have been at the time, such as other state assets. And some of us have compared it to liquor contracts and other, and these are all debatable issues, but we are acknowledgeable of the fact that when we acknowledge the fact that you guys have paid a significant amount of money, we just feel, some of us, that from a long-term perspective, the value maybe not what it should have been.
Yeah, let me comment on that specifically. If one goes back to the resolve, there is a phrase that is used in the resolve which refers to the entire transaction that was handed off to the state planning office to put out to bid as revenue neutral. The legislature directed that that whole arrangement between the state, Georgia Pacific, and the operator of the landfill would be revenue neutral. Now, the state decided not to put any money into the transaction. If you put no money in, and it's revenue neutral, it means you get no money out. That was the basis of what the state planning office was directed to do. Revenue neutrality.
Representative Abbott?
President Meagher, I found it interesting, Tom, when you talked about the various remunerations that the various towns got. Can I ask you how much did the state have invested in this?
Again, the state had no revenue to put into the purchase of the landfill, the design and operation of the landfill, assuming any of the liabilities of the landfill. None of the costs associated with the Juniper Ridge facility were borne. I'm talking about financially. Were borne by the state of Maine. All of those obligations, and then in turn, all of the revenues were placed on the operator.
And yet these various towns profited.
Well,
even though the state had not
sure.
put any of their own
yeah,
okay.
Again, revenue neutrality, we pay a state fee because those fees were being paid at other facilities before Juniper Ridge became a state-owned landfill. So to not pay these state fees would have meant the state was losing revenue it previously had. So, you know, we're completely fine with that. We went into this arrangement proposing that we would have financial benefits to the city of Old Town. Now, as it turned out, what we actually negotiated with Old Town is far in excess of what we proposed in response to the RFP. It's also far in excess of what our obligation is under the operating services agreement. But in the case of Old Town, Alton, and the neighbors, those are things we actually have done on a voluntary basis because it's what we decided to do. And I'm not, you know, saying that we wouldn't want to do that, but we should recognize at least, what I'm trying to say here is that we are providing these benefits.
And it costs the state nothing.
That's correct.
Representative Shane?
Thank you, Senator. A couple of expectations I think may have changed since the contract. And a lot of this has to do with 2010, those reports, but then I realized the situation is changing a little bit on the ground. But I'd say there's two expectations at that time. The first is the assumption that what's coming across the border for processing actually has value in it. And what we're hearing from a lot of the haulers is there's a lot of source separation that goes on before it ever, either at the transfer station or before it ever gets on a truck to come up here. So when we see a lot of oversized bulky waste happening at KTI, for instance, we're starting to make the leap of that, hey, wait a minute, what's coming in the state only in that year had only 7% of value that you could turn into wood chips. In 2010, that's basically, we didn't get any value that was expected in the original expectation. 7% of fuel out of nearly 200,000 tons of waste isn't much benefit, according to the original expectations we had of what was going to be made from fuel. The second thing is, and this came up in the Blue Ribbon Commission, I think I asked Don, is it your expectation to be able to help us meet our own recycling goals within the state? That is, will the KTI or the Westbrook facility at that time be processing main waste to the maximum extent possible? Will we take our own trash in there and try to do that? In reality, even though it's sitting in Lewiston, it only took 11% of its waste from in-state. It all got trucked in from elsewhere. I think it's two expectations that didn't really get met in the original deal. So, can you comment on that?
I can comment on both, and I'll ask Dan to help me out. In terms of what can be recovered out of a ton of COD, in 2003 there were no expectations because all of the Chapter 418 rules, which got into, that was one piece, the wood fuel quality, and then the recycling standard, which was a subsequent piece of legislation. none of that had happened at the time. So there were really no expectations, simply that 100,000 tons of C&D wood fuel had to be provided in whatever way you can do that. And there was no specificity as to how that would be done. That was simply an obligation. You have to provide that product at that price, and you got to worry about how you get it done. We made the observation at the time that even under the wood yield percentages back in 2003, there was not enough C&D being generated in Maine if Casella had control of all of it, which it doesn't then and doesn't now. You couldn't produce 100,000 tons. You wouldn't even come close. So that's, I think a piece of that. Dan, I don't know if you want to add anything particular about 2010. It was an aberration year. Some specific reasons for why the yield was so low at that time.
I would add, building up to 2010, in 2007, I believe it was, we actually got our permit in Westbrook. When we got our permit in Westbrook, we were geared up to build out Westbrook. That was a $12 to $14 million project that we were going to process the C&D in order to provide the wood chips to Red Shield at the time. When the economy crashed, capital is more expensive at this point. Legislation, we were running up against some fines issues with what they were going to be considered at that time. We had made a decision to stop Westbrook, not knowing what was going to happen there. It's a large investment to close it down after 2 or 3 years with legislative changes for fines going into Juniper Ridge or some issues with ultimate daily cover. That being said, we still have this commitment of wood chips going to Old Town. When Pine Tree Landfill closed is when we needed to keep securing that volume, move it to KTI, come up with a plan in KTI with the equipment and footprint that we have there, and try to figure out how to process more and recover more. In 2010 was that transition year of, okay, we got the material. It kind of got forced down our throat, per se, when we closed Pine Tree. We didn't have a facility to take it. We have customer obligations. Now we got to find out how to recover it. It took us a year to get the permits, got the permits, made the changes. This year you're going to see huge improvements. And Representative Shane's already seen that, as Senator Saviello. So we're headed in the right direction. We're recovering more. Our wood yield has gone from 1,000 tons a month to almost 2,500 tons a month. The recovery at KTI is substantially higher. It's improved. But again, in order to pay for that $1.5 million, we still have to pay to Old Town Fuel and Fiber. We have to do what we're doing in order to offset that and to supply the wood chips that Rolex and Sappi today continues to need.
Could I just follow up one other observation? We always seem to be discussing the incoming volume into KTI and having the question posed, why so much out-of-state C&D? And the question that never seems to be asked, which I think is the obvious and important question, why so little Maine C&D?
That was my next question.
Why do so few generators of Maine C&D choose to bring their material to KTI? We can't force them to do that. That is a decision that is made in the marketplace by the generator of the material. And I can't really answer the question because that truly can only be answered by them. But I think we've gotten some insight into that for some of the people in the room here today that are extracting useful material, wood, metal, aggregate, cardboard, out of the raw material that they're handling at their facilities. It makes no sense for them to deliver that to KTI because there's not much there yet to recover. So its proper destination is a landfill. In terms of the municipal mainline landfills that we've talked about as part of fees, and I recognize it's probably not a lot. It's been estimated at 5,000 tons a year. That seems awfully low. I don't know how accurate those numbers are. How many of these landfills actually have on-site scales that they can actually precisely measure that. But KTI, in terms of what it has to charge for C&D to run its operation, will never compete with an online landfill. That's simply never going to happen. And so that material is going to go to that destination.
Turns out
KTI.
there aren't that many tons going in online landfills. So it was 5,000, I think, or something.
Yeah, it said 5,000.
So that's almost not even in the equation. It's a rounding error.
Well, I realize now that that amounts to less than 300 tons per landfill. When I think of the population in some of those municipalities, to me it sounds like a low number, actually. But we'll take it as it is because that's apparently what
one of them's in Greenbush. Let me tell you how small this is. Those online landfills really are not in this equation. That's not what's driving the market. And the question I'm trying to figure out in my own head is, why is it happening that all these people have transfer stations, hauling companies that could forego the expense of doing all the source separation at transfer stations, just take it to you and do it there and save on all the transportation costs to get it all the way up to Juniper Ridge. Something else is going on. One of the things that occurs to me that is going on is it's a benefit to Casella to be able to take as much out-of-state waste as possible, process it there, and then take as much in-state waste as possible, take it directly up to Juniper Ridge. And that's just a hypothesis. So far, I haven't found proof against it.
I can't answer it because I'm not part of the operation of that facility. But I would expect that we would take all of the in-state waste we could take, and we take the out-of-state waste because we can't get the in-state waste.
There's something about the economics, obviously, that it's cheaper for them to do the processing and take and go all those miles up the highway when they're only 20 miles, 30 miles away from KTI. So what's going on?
Well, also remember that when they, at their facility, in many ways they're doing the same thing, what is driving their operation as is being done at KTI. At their facility, when they pull material out, that represents to them both a revenue and an avoided cost. Because they're now selling it and offsetting what would be a disposal fee.
Let me ask you this then, how do we know that same thing isn't happening in Massachusetts, since that seems to be the intelligent thing to do? And the reason we have a lot of oversized bulky waste crossing the border is because the same thing's happening there.
I think there's two things we got to look at and consider. In-state, you've got these transfer stations, you've got Troiano, you've got BBI. A lot of their work that comes in isn't from trailer work, it's from roll-off work. Some of it's from tear-down jobs, demolition projects, things of that nature. There's not a lot of that happening in Maine. That being said, you're going to get more bulky waste from cleanups, remodels, things of that nature. You're not going to get a lot of fines in there. You're going to get more OBW, less wood, less metal, some copper. There's some value in those containers. I think it makes sense for the smaller transfer stations like Troiano and BBI to handpick those items out, get some value out of it, and the rest clearly is OBW. That will go to Juniper Ridge. What we bring in from out of state are more projects that are more demo jobs that come up in trailers. They don't have a lot of bulky waste, mattresses, couches. We had that discussion when we were at KTI. A lot of the processed residue that we send out of KTI isn't a lot from out of state, isn't consistent of mattresses and furniture. It's material that has no value, tarps, there's shingle, there's a lot of dirty C&D that has no value.
And I guess that's the difference in the expectation from what was made the deal originally. The expectation was what comes across the border to make fuel out of is actually going to have some fuel in it. What we're hearing is, it really doesn't have as much fuel in it as we originally thought when we cut the original deal.
But again, the quality of the material coming in to be processed, how much of it was recycled, how much of it resulted as wood fuel there was no expectation of that at all as part of the discussion. The only expectation, and it was a requirement, it was a pre-qualification bar that any successful bidder had to get over was you have to be able to provide, however you can do it, 100,000 tons of C&D wood fuel at $4 a ton.
So wouldn't it,
That was the expectation.
since Old Town is, you're not sending any wood waste there,
Right.
wouldn't your company be in a position to potentially want to revisit this contract rather than shelling out $1.5 million a year?
We actually had the opportunity to do that in 2006. Our initial fuel supply agreement with the Georgia Pacific expired at our sole discretion when Georgia Pacific was no longer the owner. We had the unilateral right to get out of that obligation in 2006 and essentially be done with it all. We were asked by the state of Maine to renew that agreement with Red Shield and then with Old Town Fuel and Fiber. So that was something we were asked to do, and we took on at considerable expense.
Sure. I mean, the notion of you preferring that 2003, I don't want to try this whole long process,
Right.
I wish we went through hours and hours a couple summers ago about
Sure.
the rationale and history and so forth, but the notion that an asset that we own and we contract with you to operate, that we may not contemplate making changes to, it was definitely something that I would have to hope that Casella contemplated when you inked the contract. You knew there was a risk there, so I think it's our responsibility to propose these changes and ideas from time to time. So you always kind of go back to that line of statements towards us, but I just think it's our responsibility, especially in light of the fact that you guys are talking about expanding, and you're seeking the right to do that right now. I'm trying to figure out what is the public benefit of Maine in light of the current day circumstances to grant that expansion.
Well, remember also that explicit in the state's RFP, explicit in our proposal in response to it, and explicit in our contract with the state was the presumption that an expansion application would be reviewed by the DEP. And in 2003 and 2004, that was a foregone conclusion. So that assumption has been revisited by the state government in really direct contradiction to what the assumption was in 2003.
So if we just get back to, I guess, the purpose of this bill, in regards to the fees, and Representative Shane and others have said it quite a bit.
Sure.
We're looking at fees on C&D. A large percentage of C&D is coming from out of state. I think it's 80-90% of your facility? 90%. And so based on the policies of other states, Massachusetts, many would argue that we're inheriting some of the solid waste challenges now in the state of Maine based on the structure that we have set up. And fees might either compensate us or potentially change the marketplace. I mean, what's your response to that?
At the end of the day, these fees aren't going to hit the tonnage going into KPI. The fees are going to hit the main people that are going to go to online landfills. Because we're not putting a fee on material going into a processing facility.
We could do that.
Good morning, Jesse.
Can you?
Well, to respond to your question, Senator Goodall, we have said through this process, we said it also during the public hearing back when the bill was introduced, that a reasonable fee, and we think in the $1 range, on raw, unprocessed C&D into landfills, as long as it is across the board in every landfill that is taking it, so that there is a level playing field for everybody, was something we could accept. that's very different than what the bill was originally proposed as. We've also indicated that the I think it was an 8-point proposal that Senator Saviello had put together was generally acceptable. With a few refinements, there needs to be some definitions of things. So we're not opposing the fee altogether. We're simply asking for really two things. One, that it be kind of reasonable and workable, and two, that there be a level playing field. That a landfill is a landfill is a landfill. They're all valuable resources, and when you put material into a landfill, whether it's a municipal landfill or a commercial landfill or a state-owned landfill, whatever it is, you're using up that resource. And a fee ought to apply if you're going to decide that's what you're going to do to manage that resource.
Representative Shane.
Thank you. That exemption already exists now. If you own your own landfill, if you're a community, Augusta, you're exempt from the solid waste fee, management fee right now. And the rationale always was, if you're a municipality under home rule authority dealing with your own stuff, and we're not managing it for you under the solid waste management program, no fee. And that's true for all the municipal landfills. It's also true right now on all fees for the CDD landfills. So historically, this never was the case. So to suggest that we have to do this across the board would be to remove an exemption that always existed under the philosophy these guys are home rule and they're taking care of their own problem.
Well, when this committee dealt with the issue of the Lewiston landfill, you took a very different approach.
Mm-hmm. And for very different reasons.
This committee decided to insert itself as a matter of state interest into the business of municipal land.
Mm-hmm. And for very good reasons, and I'd love to take the committee's time to go over that again, but no one would like it.
Representative Parker,
I'm done for now.
I'm going off on a tangent a little bit, it doesn't relate to the bill, but I've really got to ask you to clarify something you said. In Senator Goodall's comment on public benefits, you said that under the 2003-04 contract, there's an obligation on behalf of the state to review an application. Was an obligation on behalf of the state to approve an application?
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're on the same wavelength with that.
Very, very different. All of the environmental criteria had to be demonstrated and met, and we understood that. There was no guarantee that an expansion would be approved. But it was entirely the understanding in all of those sequences that I went through that an application would be submitted without the need for a public benefit determination and reviewed by the DEP.
Without the need for a public benefit determination?
It was exempt at the time.
Now I'll ask you another question. Okay. You're spending $1 million, $1.5 million, whatever it is, you're sending a check to the whole town for fuel that's not being provided.
Well, fuel they decided not to utilize.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a check you're sending out.
Yes.
If there was a revision made in the contract that negated that, would that give you cause to reduce some of the imported waste you're looking at? I understand that you have fixed contracts that you're obligated to, but would you have a tendency to reduce that, or would you, what would happen?
Well, the challenge for us, and I would have to leave it to, frankly, people higher in the organization than myself, but we created a business model in order to fulfill an obligation that the state required us to take on in 2003, and then asked us again in 2006 to continue with when we had the sole opportunity to get out of it. Once having created that business model, we can't, what is the mechanism for somehow unwinding it and keeping us whole?
Well, I'm not necessarily sure I agree with that, because yes, you have a business model, I understand how you developed it and what came of it. But when you start talking a significant amount of money that's being diverted off, which is causing you to increase your revenues and increase your waste streams, whatever. And I know you have contracts that have fixed terms. I don't expect that 30-year contracts. They're probably shorter than that. There's an opportunity to look at what your business plan is from that point forward. Is that something worth considering?
Oh, again, I'm not going to make any specific commitments here, but if we were relieved of our obligation under the fuel supply agreement, would that create the opportunity to make some changes?
That's what I'm asking. I mean, and there's a lot more to it than just a simple answer, but I understand that as well.
But, you know, can that go to the point of, you know, terminating the entire operation of KTI? Probably not. And if we can only get, you know, what minimal amount of main C and D that we get to operate that facility, is it viable based on just that? You know, but you know, certainly that would be a significant change, which would allow to look at that for some modifications.
The original intent was to divert wood waste to the Old Town facility for their use. But they don't use it, and in lieu of that, you're sending them a check. Right? That's what's really happening there.
Correct.
Okay.
And if we didn't send them a check, you know, if we terminated that contract, I think you got to look at two things. Are they sustainable? Who's going to make up that $1.5 million on their balance sheet? And number two, you've got Sappi and Boralex who are looking for that material now. KTI doesn't provide 100,000 tons a year currently to those facilities. We provide up to probably 30 to 35,000 tons of material based on the volume that we bring into KTI. That's what we can provide out of that facility. So that being said, I don't think we could divert any more material out of KTI in order to provide these state facilities with the biomass fuel that they're requesting.
And you know, we would all like to have as high a possible wood yield content out of CDD that comes into KTI, whether it's Maine or out of state. But I think what Dan is trying to say here is that you know, to wind that back and reduce that operation, that then has a financial impact on those facilities because they're relying on KTI for good quality fuel, high BTU content per pound at a very favorable price.
Did that enter into, and I know you're not free to say a lot, but did that enter into your contracts you negotiated out of state to receive waste? In other words, did you protect that material so that it did come to you for use? Or are they doing all the reseparation and recycling and removing it before it comes to you? Or did your contract protect that? That was an obligation you had to have. Did your contract protect that? Or could it be done that way? Because we also have some other incinerators in this state that probably going to run shy of fuel. So that's an important resource if it's handled right. I just don't know where the contracts go, if you control that or if you don't control that.
I'm just not, I'm not following what a contract. If our contract with the state.
I'm in Delaware, Mass, and I have a contract with you for waste. Okay, can I totally segregate and salvage and dispose of everything that's of value and send you just what's left? Or do I have a contract with you to send you what I generate?
Yeah, I don't know what our arrangements are.
The arrangements we have with our Massachusetts facilities are if they have beneficial use material, I don't want to say that, if they have material that we can process and generate recoverable wood chips, fines, any valuable metal, anything that we can recover. That's the material that we're looking for.
Okay.
If there's material coming out of facilities that is high volume of bulky waste or material that we can't recover anything out of, we do not seek that volume.
No, but so under your contract, you did try to control that, so you do get the good stuff, not just the...
Absolutely.
A couple of questions. Mr. Meagher, in regards to, I brought the issue yesterday about bypass. I think, please correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't have the sheet in front of me. Merck bypasses 30,000 tons a year.
Into Juniper Ridge?
Into Juniper Ridge, yeah.
That's probably a close number, maybe a little bit less than that, but
20 to 30,000 tons.
yes.
And PERC, I believe, bypasses significantly less.
Very little.
Very little.
Yes.
So, why, since looking at the hierarchy, why wouldn't we try to deter that from occurring, especially when you are allowed to bypass MSW?
Let me talk about that in a number of ways. First, you had posed the question, I think it was a week ago Tuesday, and George McDonald responded, referring to the definition in state statute that bypass, waste that is bypassed from a facility in Maine is Maine-generated waste, regardless of the origin. And that is true. That is the definition in statute. But in our permit at Juniper Ridge, which predated the statutory definition, we voluntarily agreed that any bypass going to Juniper Ridge when an incinerator didn't have the capacity to handle it would only come from Maine sources. So even though the statute says it could come as bypass from out of state directly to Juniper Ridge, it does not happen that way.
Sure, but if the two trucks in the yard, one's from out of state, one's from in-state, you can bypass the in-state.
What we actually do
That's
is...
not an allegation, I'm just saying.
What we actually do is when the facility goes into bypass mode, Maine Energy, for example, it goes directly from a Maine transfer station to Juniper Ridge. It doesn't go to Maine Energy. It bypasses Maine Energy and goes directly to Juniper Ridge. So like from the Waterville transfer station.
So you have an incentive to maximize your contracts at Merck, even if you can't handle the capacity, because you know you have a relief valve to Juniper Ridge.
There is also a condition in the Juniper Ridge license that the total amount of what is accepted at Maine Energy and processed and used as fuel, and what is bypassed from Maine Energy from whatever source, the total of those two cannot exceed 310,000 tons a year, which is the capacity of Maine Energy. So we don't have the ability to bring in all of this additional waste.
My concern is the value of airspace and the fill rate of landfills. And when you look at the bypass, I'm just saying the way that you're structured from a business perspective is to maximize your contracts at Merck, knowing that if you overexceed your capacity, you can then relief valve to Juniper Ridge. And we have no deterrent in the marketplace right now to encourage you to do something other than landfill that solid waste.
Well, there are a number of things that MSW is being used for at Juniper Ridge. When a new cell,
Didn't you just get a permit for that?
yeah, we did. It's used as what's called the soft layer.
So I guess I'll cut to the chase. What would happen if we put a $5 fee on bypass and we waived the fee if that waste went to another incinerator to encourage the use of the higher?
I don't know.
Just wanted to give you the opportunity to answer. Representative Shane?
Thank you, Senator. Where's the leachate from Juniper Ridge being processed now?
Goes to the Old Town Fuel and Fiber Treatment Plant.
Do you have to pay for that, or is that
No.
So that's it. So when you were paying them what, $1 million or $1.5 million right now for not supplying fuel, to some extent that's covering your leachate. It's not a freebie.
That leachate arrangement was one of the contractual agreements.
As was the provision of the word, et cetera. So in reality, it's not like you're just sending them a check for nothing. It's actually helping to pay for your leachate.
No, because our arrangement with the mill since 2000, our contractual agreement with the state and the state's agreement with Georgia Pacific, part of all of those obligations was the mill would treat the leachate from the landfill at no charge.
Right. So you're sending the money for no charge, and they're treating your leachate for no charge. I think I got it.
We're sending them money to offset them not using C&D wood fuel, one of the agreements, and they're treating our leachate at no charge.
The last question I have, and I promise it might be a couple questions just on one topic. KTI. What's your capacity at KTI right now?
It's between 200 and 220,000 tons
A year. And you said 90% of that is coming from out of state?
Correct.
So that's your facility capacity. What's your long-term capacity, planning-wise?
I can't answer that right now. Obviously, I wouldn't want to go backwards. If anything, I'd rather be more efficient with what we're processing now. So a little more than 200,000, I'd say up to 250,000 is where we efficiently would like to be processing it.
Do you need to seek any?
With our footprint.
Sure. So if you, at what point are you going to trigger a new permit or review of your permit or amendment to your permit?
We're not currently.
No. Can you envision a point of capacity where you'll have to go revisit your permit?
In today's economy right now, no. Would I go after a permit for design changes? Absolutely.
So is your capacity a function of your site or your equipment?
Both.
What's your capacity of your equipment then?
220,000 a year.
So they're both, okay. So even if you had a bigger site, based on the equipment you had, you can't really increase the capacity. I see.
That was one of the goals we had when Dan referred to a facility in Westbrook, which we had fully permitted, and were really literally on the verge of breaking ground, and simply decided that the regulatory environment was so uncertain that we weren't going to go forward with the project. But the purpose there was a facility with today's equipment and more capacity.
But wasn't that, so because you were going to create some sort of pelletized trash too, that was one of the, or was that a different
that was a separate project associated with Maine Energy.
I see, okay. Any other questions, Representative Parker?
Double down fuel and fiber. If you all of a sudden came up with 100,000 ton of wood, would they take it?
No. Of C&D wood?
Do they have a use for it?
Of C&D wood?
Yeah.
No, we were and are prepared to provide them with C&D wood fuel. They have made the decision not to utilize that as fuel.
Okay. So they really don't have a direct use for the fuel right now?
Not with the equipment they have.
No, what they're using now.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. That's a problem with contracting with the state. You have negotiations in the open. DEP?